For 1998, 510 horsepower from a V12 was awfully respectable.
Well, you know, it actually feels better than I thought it would. Visibility out the front is excellent. The back is not terrible, but it's such an incredibly big, wide car. You know, it's the kind of car you find you always have one wheel over the double yellow line all the time. You know, if you're driving in any spirited manner. It does shrink around you a little bit. I mean, this is what they used to call in the 60s a man's car, in the sense that there's a lot of physical strength needed to drive it. You've got an extremely heavy clutch, you got a manual gearbox you really have to shove.
Well, we should let people know what we're driving, Jay. It's a 1998 Lamborghini Diablo SV, and a very special SV for that. It's one of the Monterey editions, one of 20 built for the U.S. market. Actually 20 built, period, and all sold in the U.S. And it's sort of an amazing thing that the Diablo, as an evolution of the Countach, is actually an interesting point of view as well.
Well, it is. You know, it drives a lot nicer than I thought it would be. I thought I would hate it. I actually like it. It's incredibly cramped in here for what a big car that it is. I mean, you look at an engine that is really no bigger than a 350 Chevy in terms of displacement, but I assume this is a 4-valve? No.
No, it's not.
It's a 2-valve.
2-valve.
Wow, okay. Now, why would that be? You sure? Because it's...
I am pretty sure that
I mean, the Quattro valve came out in '86. Why 10 years later would they go back to a 2-valve?
Well, this is also... No, actually, you know what? It might be the 4-valve.
Yeah, I'm almost positive it's a 4-valve.
Yeah, because they did have the strange thing that they revived the SV moniker for this car, which goes Super Veloce, which is always the hottest of the Lamborghinis. They never made a Countach SV, strangely enough, but when this car was introduced, it was actually not the highest performance. It had the most power, but the higher performance car was the VT, the all-wheel drive Diablo. This is rear-wheel drive only.
The SV was actually the basic model, if there is such a thing.
Right, exactly.
It was the base model. And like you say, a 1998 500 horsepower, oh my God, because Corvette was still lulling around 350. So this was seen as just unbelievable. The only thing that had more horsepower was, I guess, the Viper, really.
Right.
There might have been one or two other exotics, but not many. And you know, it actually drives very nice. This was when Chrysler still owned them, I think.
Chrysler still owned them. Audi would buy them the next year in 1999.
Right. I give Chrysler credit for saving the company.
Yes.
I think Lamborghini.
Coca.
Yeah, I think Lamborghini would have gone under had it not.
Much like Aston Martin, it just went through a series of owners. The car was conceived when the Mimram brothers owned the company because they needed a successor for the Countach, and it's really interesting, of course, too, because the car was intended to be released on the 25th anniversary of the company, but it wasn't ready, so they did the 25th anniversary Countach instead.
This was designed. It was originally Marcello Gandini, and then Chrysler didn't. Which his original design went on to be the Chisetta Marotta, which was I didn't think was a very good car. I drove it. I drove the prototype actually. I didn't care for it. I don't mind the styling of this.
I rather like it. I think that Tom Gale did a really great job.
Tom Gale's a wonderful designer. And, I think he did a good job. The build quality is certainly much better.
Yes.
Everything works. You still need ballet slippers to drive it.
It's funny that it's so much longer than a Countach because they wanted to make the passenger compartment more comfortable and have more room for other things. So like there's actual room behind the seats, for instance, but it still feels very cramped. Actually, I think that the Countach, in a way, feels sort of airier.
Yeah, this does feel very cramped to me.
Yeah.
I mean, my feet barely fit in the footwell. If I was driving this in a spirited manner, I'd certainly drive it with loafers or
driving shoes.
Or no shoes at all, actually. Just because even now when I have to put my foot against the side of the transmission tunnel to not hit the brake when I'm stepping on the gas. But very responsive, obviously fuel injected. They seem to have gotten those kinks out of it. I mean, getting it to meet emissions back in '98 was a real challenge. This is an engine, as you said, designed back in the '60s.
Exactly.
And it was not meant for the modern world, so to speak.
Right, and Chrysler made the point, obviously having made the investment in Lamborghini, that they weren't going to do what the Memram brothers had done and basically sort of pick and choose international markets wherever the car might work.
Right.
They said this car had to be able to be certified for the entire world. They wanted to sell it everywhere. And it was the best-selling Lamborghini model ever until, of course, Audi came out with the Gallardo.
Right.
And you think about the sales numbers of Lamborghinis. That the Urus has sold in 2 years more than the entire production run of Diablos and Murcielagos put together.
My own personal taste, I prefer the earlier Lamborghinis. They weren't quite so machismo oriented. I mean, they were
different, but different in sort of, I don't know, I want to say a nice way because these are different in a nice way too. But you're right, they weren't that sort of wild, in-your-face kind of thing.
To me, the best designs are a combination of male and female.
Right.
The Jaguar XKE, beautiful car because it has masculine haunches and feminine front end, and it appeals to a lot of different people, For example, women will go crazy for the Miura, and men go crazy for the Miura.
Right.
Because the Miura has some feminine line to it, Well, I don't know many women that go, oh, look at it. When you drive this, there's that sort of, how old are you? Kind of,
Well, let me ask you this, though. I think that this arguably might have a more universal appeal in the way that you describe it than the late Countaches, because the late Countaches are very aggressive cars, and the softness of this, I think, brings a little bit back of what you were talking about, that sort of the feminine side,
and I have to admit, it drives very nice. I'm impressed. Now, I have no idea where we're going, but what tenuous connection between this car and a house in Newport? I can't imagine this wild, futuristic, certainly for 1998 looking car. I've never seen a house around here that looks anything like this.
Well, Jay, what year was the Countach introduced?
Countach was introduced way back in the 70s.
Exactly. And this is based on the Countach. So inside this Diablo, a more modern car, is an older car. And the house we're going to see, Ocean View, tells a similar story. What you see is really underneath.
Right.
So let's take a look at Ocean View.
Kind of like Donald himself.
Exactly. So Jay, as we discussed, the design of the Diablo is so amazing to me because it's got that fluidity that you don't see in a lot of cars of this period. And it's one of those cars that does do the proverbial looking fast while being parked.
Well, you can see the American influence. The windows go all the way down, just about all the way down. That single patty at Wendy's door that was in the Countach, yeah, that was intolerable. Plus, the air conditioning never quite works. You're always like panting for air, sticking your tongue out of this letterbox. It looked ridiculous. So you've got a full window here, and visibility is good from the front, impossible from the back. And you can't get over the fact this is a huge automobile.
Yeah.
It's extremely wide. I mean,
it's wide and long, and it's very funny. You talked about the fact that the engine itself is just basically the size of a 350 Chevy, but let's take a look under the hood, the business end of a Lamborghini, to really see what the story is. The heart of the action right here.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's extraordinary too for me that Giotto Pizzarini's basic architecture for the engine that he designed back in the early 1960s lasted so long.
Well, I mean, the equivalent would be the small box Chevy developed in '55 by Ed Cole, and it literally can trace its lineage right up to the latest C8 Corvette, although it's a bit of a stretch, but basically like this, same thing. You start with a 2-valve engine, carbureted, then you go to 4-valve, then you go to fuel injection, you know. I mean, this engine just ran out of life this year, I guess.
Exactly. I mean, this is the 5.7 liter version of what started as a 3.5 liter engine. And it's also, you know, I miss seeing engines.
Right.
It's so beautiful to see this. And it's
this is the beginning of the cover-up period.
Yeah.
This engine is pretty well covered. Now it would have a complete sheet of plastic over it, yeah.
But it's something. I love the vacuum hose diagram there. Again, something very indicative of the period in which this car was built, because emissions were still being handled largely by vacuum systems.
Yeah, and you know, we grew up. We remember the era of the engine dress-up kit. You'd buy the valve covers and the chrome dipstick and all that. But let's
now, looking back into that engine compartment and seeing the roots of Lamborghini inside this more modern car, let's talk about Ocean View.
All right. So Donald, how old is this house?
This house is 1866 by William Russell Walker for Charles L. Anthony of New York, and it's one of the earliest houses built here. As you recall, when we did Seaweed earlier in the series, which is one of the earliest houses built, 1861, this part of town was just beginning to be developed. So when this house was built in the Second Empire French style, it was really alone here. It did not have neighbors. And this is a house which is quite interesting in the tenuous connection period. The fact that this house was built, was sold after its first owner after a few years, and the second owner named it Ocean View. It was purchased by an architect in 1935 and remained in his family for over 90 years.
Oh, okay.
In 1983, there was a major fire and much of the house was burned down.
Right.
However, it was rebuilt in the style of the original house.
Okay.
So much as we have seen the Countach buried in the Diablo, and we will see in other tenuous connections to come, this is a house that is reborn, but very much in the shape that it had when new.
Thus defining tenuous connection. So the other house burned down, they put another house here. So, but is there any basic, did the chimneys remain? Anything remain from the original?
Just the front facade was left.
Right.
But when they rebuilt it, they built it on the same footprint of the original house, and also replicated some of the decorative details that had been in the original house when it burned. The French Second Empire style was known for its eclectic mix of details, but marked by the use of a mansard roof, which is shallow with a flat top and prominent dormer windows. It was the dominant architecture of the major rebuilding of Paris under Eugène Haussmann between 1853 and 1870, which gives us the look of that city today. Original details of the 1866 interior, such as the egg and dart detail on the raised panel door moldings, and the elegantly sweeping banister of the main stair, were recreated in the rebuild. The view from the house was expansive for a home of this period and enhanced in the reconstruction. Ocean View sits far enough from the shoreline to be protected from the worst of the weather, yet still remains open to the dramatic setting.
Well, it's a very traditional back east home. You know, it looks like what I would see in Belmont in Boston, or on the outskirts, on the wealthy outskirts of town. It's certainly a nice house. It's just so funny how something that was built in 1866 is still contemporary and still suits us. Room size, everything else is exactly what we like today. We haven't changed that much in our living habits, have we, really, when you think about it?
We haven't, and also when this house was rebuilt, they actually did it in a very sensitive and interesting fashion, because back in 1866, many houses didn't have lots of large windows and vistas that looked out. people went outside to go to the vista. They didn't invite the vista in.
Right.
And the rebuild of this house does do that while still maintaining the shape and form of the original house. One of the other things which is quite interesting is that we don't generally think of beach houses in the French Second Empire style, but there are a lot of French influence in architecture here in Newport, and this is one of the few built in this particular style. When the house was new, it had large black window shutters, storm shutters, that gave the house a very distinctive look, even more formal than the look it has now. Let's go to another example of something which appears to be something on the outside, but is rather different on the inside. So what we have here apparently is a 1967 Corvette Roadster, 427 Stinger hood, but it's rather something different underneath, and obviously it gives away some of that with the flares, the big aggressive side pipes, and the customized front and rear ends. This is actually a Resto-mod with a 454 engine under the hood, the lowered suspension, and other modifications to make it into a bit of a performance rocket. Let's take a look at that engine.
All right, there we go. Well, big blocks don't get much bigger than that. Actually, this one seems somewhat excessive to me. I mean, I love a 67 Corvette. It's my favorite body style. I don't think you need the flares or the big tires. It was a nice, well, it wasn't a well-balanced automobile before with a big block, but it was, this is a case, I think, where we'll drive in a minute, where the engine overwhelms the chassis. It's got more power than it can probably handle. And with those side pipes, you're getting that, it feels like a loud four-cylinder when you're on the other side. You're hearing only one pipe. You know, I like pipes come out the back so you hear the whole thing. Like in that, you hear the noise behind you. Here you hear the noise right next to you. I'm assuming, we'll find out in a minute.
Well, it's a very interesting thing, Jay. When I first saw this car in the collection, I thought, well, this is not the kind of car I would like at all. And as I began to become more familiar with it, it began to grow on me. But, you know, this is clearly, as you said, big blocks don't get bigger than this. And it's clearly meant for business. I mean, with that big radiator and that honking fan, I mean, they wanted to make sure this is a car to drive. Which is a good sign, so it's not a poser's
I mean,
car.
Easy to work on, big 4-barrel carburetor. I assume the transmission is modified too. Is that a 5-speed or is that the rock crusher?
It's a 4-speed. I think it's a Getrag 4-speed.
Oh, it is a regular. Oh, it is. Okay.
So let's
let's take it for a ride.
See what this is like on the road. The first time I saw this car, I thought, this is not a very Donald Osborne car. You, like you, I love the 67 Corvette. I think it's probably, for me, the nicest of the, well, I can't say the nicest because the 63 split window is just wonderful, but the details on the 67, when, you know, the 63 has those fake hood vents and all that stuff, the 67, everything is functional. And the design is just so incredibly beautiful and clean. And you think, okay, well, how can you improve on that? And I thought the idea of Resto-mods generally, especially on cars like Corvettes, have a tendency towards just adding power and nothing else. So you can have an engine
I mean, it's
that overwhelms it.
It's that what the Europeans call American excess.
Exactly.
You know, and to me, the Corvette did not need more power. You know, had enough power, enough style. I like the hubcap tires. Wheels rather. The knockoff I like too. That was pretty. The side pipes. The side pipes to me don't do it any favors. First of all, I think you miss some of the sound because that side overwhelms your ear. And it makes it sound like a really loud 4-cylinder.
You're right. I think about that.
Because you're getting most of your noise from that side. It's not. And to me, when you drive a car like this with straight pipes out the back, the sound's behind you, so it's more, I don't know.
It's also the fact that you get fumes inside an open car. It's sort of difficult to do.
This is one of the few cars you can be asphyxiated with the top down. It rides very nice, but the noise ruins it. It's a little too loud for what it is.
It's really interesting. As I said, when I first looked at this car in the collection, I thought, this is not a very neat car. And I thought, it's not going to have any of the things that I love about Corvettes. But the funniest thing is that this car, of course, it has got sort of all the check-the-box, build a Resto-mod Corvette thing, rectangular port heads, high-lift cams that make it very racy, and a lowered F41 suspension, heavy-duty suspension, and that's probably the real Achilles heel of this car. It handles really well. I was shocked with the big tires and all, that it still sort of feels like a Corvette.
Right.
But there's not enough suspension travel. Maybe it's the roads around here.
Right.
But, if
I
the
think
regular Corvette would have more compliance.
Yeah.
It's very dramatic to drive, but I'm not quite sure if I'd characterize it as fun to drive,
Well, the funny thing that's kind of changed the whole deal is the electric car.
Yeah.
Because if you want to go fast, you get a Tesla Plaid. Now you have the fastest car in the world. And suddenly, things like this that used to be the fastest aren't anymore. So put it back to what it was intended to be, To me, I like the 327 seems like a lighter, smaller engine than the big 427. This is a lot like the 427 Cobra. The 427 Cobra never won a race.
No.
The 289 is the only one that won any races. But everybody wants the 427
because of the look.
Yeah. Well, and it's bigger.
Yeah.
I mean, in America, people always buy a 6-speed instead of a 5-speed, even if the rear end ratio was the same. Because hey, you're getting an extra speed. You're getting something else. And to me, it's a little bit excessive.
Yeah, I think the entire point of this car is to put the performance stats down on paper, but this is all about making the impression, seeing the big flares, the chrome side pipes,
plus
and the sound it makes.
If you grew up in a small town in New England like I did, and you had this, you had the fastest car in town. I mean, that's what it was.
Yeah,
you go to the A&W drive-in, wherever people hang out, and you got the fastest car, bar none. Now a guy shows up with a 4-door Tesla Plaid with his kids in the back and everything else, and he blows your doors off.
But it is such a funny thing. People think they know who you are and what your tastes are. I'm sure that most of the people watching this would never imagine that Donald Osborne would have a smile on his face driving a Resto-mod Corvette.
Right.
But, again, I think that's also a part of the adventure of cars,
Yeah, but the more you drive it, the more the smile goes away. Because you say to yourself, it's the pounding noise.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Exactly. That's what I mean. This is a great half-hour car.
Yeah.
You go out for a half hour, you blast down the coast, you put your foot in it, but I think to drive it, this was intended to be an American version of a European sports car. And it just become more American and less European. And that's what I don't like about the Resto-mod part of it. If I Resto-modded a Corvette, I would do a small block, maybe with Webers on it, 4-wheel disc brakes if it didn't have that already. I love the dashboard.
The dashboard is great. I do think that, again, the F41 suspension is terrific in as much as it adds the sway bar and all that stuff. I think it helps handling. I wouldn't lower it. There's no reason to do that.
Right.
So again, I think that you have actually been quite adept at making adaptations of cars, like most famously, of course, your Toronado, that still somehow keep the essence of what the original car was without transforming, even though you went to rear-wheel drive with the Toronado, obviously. But still, it still has that same feel. It's not a totally different car. Right.
And the Toronado was an extremely luxurious car, nice, comfortable driving car, which it still is.
Right. With all that power and all of that. And
what gear are you in now?
I'm in second.
I mean, put it into third or fourth, see what it does.
It's rather docile.
Yeah, It's just, to me, those side pipes sort of ruin it, you know.
It's as they say, you know, sort of gilding the lily. You don't have to do it, but somebody said, well, if you're going to do it, you have to have this, you have to have this, you have to have that in order to make it what it's supposed to be.
It's like Audrey Hepburn as a stripper, you know. It doesn't really, you know.
Exactly. Audrey Hepburn has her own charms. That's the entire point.
That's right. And this car has its charm. And I remember seeing, I don't know who the ad was for. It was for a politician running for Congress back in the 90s. I think he was from Ohio, some politician. And he was a thrifty guy. And he drove his, like, 1968 Dodge Dart to Washington, you know, that kind of thing. And they showed the tailpipe and said, sure, it blows a little smoke, but, you know, it's got plenty of miles left in it. Well, now you could never say it blows a little smoke. But then that was seen as a sign of...
You're a regular guy.
You're a regular guy, you're being thrifty, you know. And this, it's so noisy, and the pipes are so loud, it's just, people are angry when you go by. Instead of being envious, they're mad at you, you know.
Well, actually, I have to say, I've driven this car before around Newport, and you get a lot of thumbs up.
Well, that's true. Well, yeah. I'm not saying. I'm just, when I look at what else is available, this would not be my first choice.
You can have fun a lot more responsibly than this car expresses. That's for sure. And it is amazing. You actually do get fumes inside an open car.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
So, of course, from the outside, this appears to be a 1973 Porsche 911 Carrera RSR.
Right.
The car that returned Porsche to frontline GT racing after the Carrera GTs in the 1950s.
Right, and it was never a street car, always a competition car only, correct?
Correct. It was a competition car only. Some were run in road rallies, and occasionally the homologation specials of those were used on the street as very aggressive street cars, but they were designed as circuit race cars.
Right.
And this, however, is an example built from a 1972 Porsche 911 by Kevin Jeanette of Gunner Racing.
Oh, sure. They do great work.
It's great work, and also this car, unlike a lot of other RSR tributes, were built with RSR genuine parts and to the exact specification. 2.8 liter engine, 308 horsepower, genuine RSR wheels, the lightweight interior, all the component parts, even the door frames are the correct RSR lightweight door window frames. It has the Heinzmann fire suppression system as delivered in all the RSRs. So every effort was taken to build as exact a copy, a replica in the true sense of the word replica.
Right.
As
Let's take a look at the engine here.
Yes, got the fiberglass cover, and so every detail, and again, a lot of people have built RSR tributes that have big 4-liter engines and 500 horsepower and all that, but this is designed to give that exact kind of balance that these cars from the factory had. And again, to stretch my tenuous connection even further, much like the reconstruction of Ocean View, it was done in a way to absolutely replicate the original.
Right. So this would be sort of like an IROC Camaro or you know, the Laguna Seca Mustang, one of those deals. They had the 302 motor. Yeah, it's just a wonderful street car, I imagine. Because if there's anything these were lacking in the day, it was horsepower.
Yes.
And with 300, and it only weighs what, 1,800 pounds?
1,850 pounds.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty incredible. I mean, you figure the average car would weigh 3,400 pounds, so it's almost half the weight. So that would almost be like an extra 100 horsepower, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Precisely. You find the power where you find the weight, like dear Colin Chaplin. For weight.
Find the power where you found the weight. You know how much power you and I would have combined? Oh, man.
We're talking world-beating power.
That's right. Let's lock that up.
Let's see how true to its roots the car is on the road.
Yeah, I'm anxious to drive this. Seems like this would be the most driver-focused of the three cars, of the other two cars, rather.
Let's see.
Or the three cars. Well, the first thing they got right is the seat. This seat, this corduroy, is extremely comfortable. You know, the Diablo was just uncomfortable from the minute you got into it. Too skinny, too cramped. This has all kinds of room for normal-sized feet The seat goes back enough so you can work the clutch and the brake. Oh, this is fantastic. I'm anxious to drive it.
Start her up. Now, obviously, driving an air-cooled, high-performance car, oil is your best friend.
Right. And this one did not leave the factory as an RSR, right?
Correct.
This is based on, this is a
1972
streetcar 911 with RSR parts to it, right?
Correct.
And the engine's been built.
It's been completely built to original RSR specification by Kevin Jeanette of Gunner Racing. And unlike a lot of other RSR tribute cars, this car uses actual RSR parts. The wheels, the fenders are actual RSR parts, even down to the window frames, which are a lighter weight, single piece creation for the RSRs. And
but the factory has RSRs, different frame, different chassis, correct?
The RSR had the standard chassis of the 911, but everything was lighter weight.
Right. Well, it feels incredibly light. What is it, 1,800 pounds?
1,850 pounds. Okay. And as we've often discussed before, you know, the secret to real performance is power to weight ratio. So 308 horsepower with 1,850 pounds is fairly potent. And also talking about sound, the three cars we've had today all have a very distinctive sound, 5-speed, really distinctive sound.
Right.
I guess the question is, which is the sound that can linger in your ear the longest with the most pleasure?
It's funny, now this is the only one that would be considered a race car, but it is the most civilized, I think. Well, the Diablo's not bad.
Yeah, the seats are a little
this
sort of like a carnival ride.
This is more comfortable than the Diablo.
Than the Diablo, yes. You're definitely held in place by these seats. And also compared to the Corvette, considering this is an RSR car, the suspension is actually very comfortable as well.
Very comfortable. And it's a total analog car. You know, everybody wants a McLaren F1 because there's no electronics, there's no... Well, neither is this.
Right.
Very crisp.
Yes, instant response.
Yeah. These seats are very comfortable. This is so much more comfortable than the Diablo, which is actually a pain to drive.
And also, as we've discussed often about various cars, about the message it sends. This car sends a very clear message about what it is. So therefore, there's no confusion with lots of extra stitching and all of that. It's a performance car. And also something that I always thought was really important from some of the Italian cars, specifically performance cars, race cars built by Zagato. The Zagato brothers and their father were racers. So they knew how important it was to design really comfortable seats, because you could not win a race if you were exhausted. And I think this is definitely the perfect example of a performance seat that's designed to make sure that you can do the job you need to do without being distracted. Well, you remember when it was quite common before they fitted tachometers to a lot of cars, you'd see, especially in Italian cars and in Porsches, you see the indications on the speedometer for maximum speed and gears. And of course, there's also a great badge of honor when you were learning a particular car without a tachometer to listen to it and figure out where you got maximum power in a specific gear. Because you could rev it to God knows where, but you weren't going to get any more power out of it. It is not surprising that Porsche began to rule sports car racing in the mid-1970s with cars like this. And it's also quite interesting because, of course, I really love the 904. And many people ask, why didn't they sort of continue with the 904 and make more production sort of street and GT racing versions of that? And I think that they made the decision, as many manufacturers do, to concentrate their GT racing on the production car.
Right.
That way they can more directly sell the production cars rather than a very limited production car, and they went to the prototypes instead, you know, to the 906, 910, and all of that. So it's quite interesting that this car, Jay, I think, shows very, very well to you what can be done in the look of a car with a total rebuild.
Right.
This is not born as an RSR, but it feels like an RSR. Ocean View is not the house that was built in 1866, but the Ocean View that sits today still has the spirit and feeling of the original house.
Hence the tenuous connection.
Exactly.